Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. With so many of you on the move, I know it's not easy. Speaking of being on the move, not all moves are healthy. So, don't move from place and get ready for a legend a little closer to home than you think. Bradbury's local legend.
When I first moved to this town, I could instantly sense that something was wrong here. It wasn't due to anything definable, tangible, despite the oddity of my living circumstances. We own a house now, Mom and Dad that is, but we started off in one of those low-budget, single-story motels, not dissimilar from the thousands that populate the countryside, coast to coast. The only thing that really set this place apart, at first glance anyway, is that the motel was situated right between two graveyards, making the place nearly literally surrounded by headstones. Creepy, especially at night during those late-night strolls. But again, that was it. There were no recently disturbed plots, no dismembered, rotten body parts. Aside from its ominous setting, the place really was completely normal. And yet, I felt that lingering sense of looming dread, of unease, but no real construct to hinge the notion upon. We only lived there for a couple of weeks, just long enough for the renovations to be finished up, but my father's new job at the time demanded that he be in town and available before the renovators could complete their tasks. The only other thing that really bothered me about the place was that it was in the middle of nowhere, essentially miles in each direction from any real semblance of civilization. However, there was one oddity, easily within walking distance, but not something anyone would want to make frequent visits to. An old, seemingly forgotten, small brick building. It had no windows and only one door, and looked like it hadn't seen a human presence in an age. The bricks were beginning to fade and crumble. The walkway leading up to the door was nearly swallowed up entirely by the encroaching, flourishing plant life. I might have taken it for some one-story ossuary, as it wasn't too far from the dual cemeteries surrounding that rural motel. But then, why would it be on the other side of the road, and so far away? So, with that line of logic failing, I had no idea what to think. I had seen this place a few times before, on small walks up and down the same stretch of road, but this day, one small detail was different. I saw the gaping maw on its face, and noted the observable contrast from my existing schema of the place. But at the time, I suppose I wasn't giving the small, in-the-middle-of-nowhere building all that much attention. That day, I was on a mission of exploration, desiring to know more about this foreign place. 3 or so miles down the road, I spied a site I would become very acquainted with in the months to come: the school. I still wasn't enrolled yet, as my mother insisted it would be impractical to start off a new school from a hotel. And on this day, the school was vacant of student and staff. The place looked massive, far bigger than my previous school, and halfway encompassed by forest that expanded skyward as much as it did outward, stretching up moderately, inkling towards the small mountain's peak. I used to live in Kansas, and let me tell you, if you haven't been there, nothing but flat fields as far as the eye can see. The scenery is literally so monotonous, it gets repetitive and visually nauseating after only a day or two. This place looked like some sort of enchanted forest wonderland. To me, anyway. The whole landscape did. aside from the frequent, intermittent fields and meadows. Like moth to a flame, I decided to explore the outside of the school, and mostly the forest behind it. The parking lot, like most rural schools, was sprawling. Not to mention this school had all three institutions, elementary, middle school, and high school, in one location, albeit in separate buildings. The lot used for bus parking alone was enormous, causing it to take much longer to cross the sun anvil than I expected. The grounds for each building were interconnected, but I was instantly drawn towards one particular location. Now, it's not like I attend elementary school, or that I was looking to play per se, but there was something intrinsic, a childhood element that pulled me towards the direction of the playground. Nothing magical or possessing, just a simple nudge from the recesses of my mind to persuade me into reconnecting with my childhood, a sensation I'm sure many of you have felt. I mean, seriously, how many times have we seen teens hanging out at school on the park playground? Granted, most of them are smoking weed, but it certainly is a common occurrence. And this day would turn out like many others, because as I approached the brightly colored swings, complex jungle gyms, and wood chip pit, which all stood firm, I caught a glimpse of 3 bicycles leaned against the back exterior of the school wall. Thing was, these weren't little kids' bikes. These belonged to large middle schoolers or high schoolers. My hopes of making a friend or two out here before I would enter the school system peaked, and I scanned with my eyes and ears, both high and low, near and far, for any of the owners of these bikes. At first, I saw and heard nothing, but it wasn't either of these senses that first alerted me to the presence of other people. As I slowly crossed the expanse of the playground, weaving up and down to catch sight of the ins and outs of the crawl spaces and cubbyholes, a familiar scent graced my nostrils. Marijuana. As I drew nearer the tree line, the aroma grew stronger, insinuating I was getting closer to its source. "Something smells really good. Puff puff give, guys," I yelled out into seemingly nothing, hoping that whoever was toking up on some obviously really good kind bud, that they might hear my plea and offer me to join them, hence greasing the wheels at making friends. It had worked, because only a few moments after I had let out my call, I first heard giggling, and then coughing, and then, "We're over here, stoner," from off beyond the edge of the darkness and tree trunks that comprised the dense woodland before me. I was headed in the right direction, and so I plodded on. It was only another 50 yards or so beyond the first step of the trees that I spied 3 laughing and smoking individuals about my age. I would come to know Terry and Sean as the 2 boys. Terry was a little taller and muscular than Sean, and if it wasn't for his baggy clothes, one would mistake him for a football player. Sean, on the other hand, looked like your typical burnout, and I expect it wouldn't matter what he was wearing. Of course, the red cap that he had on sideways certainly accentuated his outward expression. And lastly, there was Kara. Really cute with long blonde hair and big blue eyes, but the type of girl who you could tell could be a real bitch. Not my type. Still, all 3 were nice enough to ask me to come join them, and so I did. "You moved to where, man?" said Terry, passing me a newly rolled fat boy. "Well, right now me and my parents are shacked up in that budget motel just down on Route 9 on the right-hand side," I said, taking my hit. "Oh, wait, your parents are staying at that really weird old place? I always found that kind of creepy," said Kara. "So, that means that you go past the cell to get here, right?" asked Sean, taking the joint from me. "The cell? What's that?" I asked, naively. Sean was about to answer me, but was having difficulty speaking while trying to hold onto his very large hit, something he was failing at miserably, as with each suppressed cough, spasm of his lungs, small puffs of smoke were escaping between his lips. What Sean is trying to explain is that the cell, as Sean so crudely put it to a newcomer, is that old brick building on the opposite side of the road between here and that old motel. You mean that little building that looks like no one ever takes care of it? I asked. That's the one, Sean exclaimed, handing Kara half a smoldering joint. What's so special about that place? I asked. At this point, I just had to know what was so mysterious about this place, and that it has all the local teens abuzz about it. Well, Terry began. The three of us heard this story from my brother, but he wasn't the only one there that night, and no matter who you talk to, which source the story comes from, the tales are identical. It's kind of hard to argue the validity of that point. So, trust me when I say this. When we all say this, the other two nodded in agreement here, that there's something wrong with that place. Something wrong that needs to stay there. Not lives there, per se, but you would be wise to take the long way around next time you venture out this way. I don't know if you've taken a walk through those graveyards or wondered how such a small town like this could produce so many corpses. But if you do take a stroll, you're bound to notice a pattern. Many, if not most, who've been buried there met their demise in 2008. So, about a year before he graduated. At first, the police thought it was some vagrant taking kids, but when the bodies began showing up, serial killer crossed everyone's mind. But it was soon divulged to authorities that the children, all found along this stretch of Route 9, discarded like trash, were all mutilated, uniformly, yet in unconventional ways. The first body, police assumed the corpse had been partially devoured by local beasts, like wolves or something. But when the second and the third were found exactly the same way, the consumption by animals post-mortem wasn't holding water. And besides, further investigation of the bodies concluded that each had been eaten alive, or at least eaten to death while first living. A silence came over everyone here, and I could nearly see everyone shudder at the thought of being eaten alive, gnashed between teeth, until your body systems just finally give out. Still wrestling with the idea myself, Terry continued. Now, this is where the police reports end, and myth begins, or resurfaces anyway. There's this really old local myth that's been told around here for longer than any of our parents have lived here, with the exception of Sean, whose family roots go back to, 3 generations? Terry inquired, making sure. Sean agreed, and he continued on, having my full attention now. I mean, it's kind of stupid, at least we all thought it was. But it's about this old witch that used to live in the woods about a mile or so behind Bradbury Farms. Terry pointed in the direction of the large farm that I had taken note of when we first rolled into town a couple of weeks back. The old people in town around here tell kids, warn them to stay out of those woods after sundown, and if they don't mind, then the Bradbury witch will steal them away and take them for her meal, discarding their remnants on well-traveled paths for their kin to find in the morning. At least, that's what they say. Well, I guess after about 20 or more kids went missing, only to be discovered later, mutilated on the side of the road, that everyone couldn't help but take the story seriously, at least as a consideration. But my brother and his friends did more than consider. They set out to find and stop that thing before anyone else got hurt. They figured that the police could never take the idea of an apparition seriously, and then rather leave the local children to their doom. The few that remained, all were at least trying to do something about it. Chad never spoke much about that night, at least not about what happened in detail after they set off, but all I know is that whatever they had trapped that night is sealed up tight in that windowless building, that his friend Pete never came back with him. Did they actually see something that night and trap it? Did they lie and make up the whole thing for posterity? Who the hell knows? I sure as hell don't know. But what I can say for certain is after that night, the disappearances and murders stopped. Police never found any killer, and that building has been sealed shut ever since, and no one I've ever met has ever gone near it. Terry finished, and my face kind of went pale. In contrast, what I had seen on nearly every walk so far, the same on every day, except this day. An object out of place, benign if I had not known the contents of this story, and I felt my blood run cold. Dude, are you okay? You look really pale all of a sudden. It's just an old local story. Just stay away and you'll be fine, man. This guy gets paranoia bad off this shit. Sean finished with a chuckle, ending his dialogue while looking at Terry and Kara, implicating me. No, that's not it. You said the door's closed, right? That it's always closed? Yeah, so? Why? Terry inquired. It took a moment, but I finally spat it out. Like, if I didn't choke out the words, they would fall silent. But as soon as the words fell out of my face, I could see their skin go white as well, and dread wash over their entire beings, when I explained that on this particular day, on my way over here, I had spied that same door, hanging off its hinges of a metal door frame, its surface dented, edges of the door bent. We knew, and I could see it in their faces, that whatever prisoner that place had held was now free, once again unleashed.
That just goes to show you, sometimes it's better not to ask questions. After all, ignorance is bliss, and terror is stifled when you don't see the axe coming. But more horror is certainly on its way, right here next weekend. So, until then, remember to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.